people think that goes away in April with the heat.
Hello, welcome to Planet America. I'm John Barron.
I'm Shaz Chidallo.
On tonight's show, the President takes a break from fighting coronavirus to pick a fight with reporters.
And America's unemployment numbers are in, and as Trump would say, they are huge. But first...
It was the day America's death toll from COVID-19 passed 80,000. In what's being described as his mission accomplished moment, President Trump yesterday declared victory in the battle against coronavirus.
In every generation, through every challenge and hardship and danger, America has risen to the task. We have met the moment, and we have prevailed.
Wording rather reminiscent of this speech from then-President George W. Bush.
The Battle of Iraq, the United States and our allies have prevailed.
Premature as it turned out, that was May 2003. US troops were still fighting insurgents in Iraq 8 years later. So, when President Trump said America had prevailed over this pandemic, what did he mean exactly?
We prevailed on testing is what I'm referring to. That was with regard to testing.
Right, so the President says they've prevailed when it comes to testing. But Chaz, have they really though?
No. Not only is America not #1 on tests per capita, but they're behind Denmark, Spain, Ireland, they're even behind Russia, which was a complete joke a few weeks ago. They're behind us. In fact, they're ranked 27 out of the bigger countries in the world. In terms of raw numbers, America's up to about 300,000 tests a day, but that's still about half of what it should be. Although the good news is that at least COVID cases aren't going up with the testing. So the percentage of positive tests has finally dropped below 10% and is heading in the right direction. By the way, they haven't prevailed over COVID deaths yet either. These are the daily deaths up to the weekend, and there is the 7-day average remaining stubbornly consistent. Furthermore, if we remove the New York area from the picture, deaths are trending up quite a bit. And as far as new cases go, well, there are your daily cases up to the weekend, with the 7-day average gradually starting to drop. But if we remove the New York area, this is what the 7-day average looks like, still going up relatively quickly for the rest of America. But one bit of good news is that the US may still yet prevail on testing, because the first antigen test has been approved by the FDA. And antigen tests are faster, cheaper and easier to make than current tests. They're talking about going from 200,000 antigen tests per week to 1 million tests per week by the end of the month. So that could help America pass that 500,000 tests a day barrier.
Now, Chaz, speaking of testing...
Several White House staffers and members of the Secret Service who work in close proximity to the president on a daily basis have now tested positive for COVID-19.
And among them is Katie Miller, spokesperson for Vice President Mike Pence, thereby proving, as far as the president is concerned, that tests aren't always a good thing.
This is why the whole concept of tests aren't necessarily great. The tests are perfect, but something can happen between a test where it's good and then something happens and all of a sudden she was tested very recently and tested negative. And then today, I guess, for some reason, she tested positive.
Yeah, Chaz, I'm no doctor, but even I'm pretty sure the reason why you don't have the virus one day and then you do have the virus the next day is because in between you're exposed to the virus. So maybe that is why this week, to reduce that risk, everybody at the White House finally, except the president, was ordered to wear a face mask, except in their offices. Mike Pence worked from home, so did health advisors Dr. Anthony Fauci and Deborah Birx. Meanwhile, President Trump's press conference yesterday went a little bit off the rails.
Anybody else? Please, go ahead in the back, please.
I have 2 questions.
No, it's okay.
But you pointed to me. I have 2 questions, Mr. President.
Next, please.
But you called on me.
I did, and you didn't respond, and now I'm calling on
Sorry, I just
the young lady in the back, please.
I just wanted to let my colleague finish,
Okay.
but can I ask you
Ladies
a
and
question?
gentlemen, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
He's taking his toys and he's going home, John.
She is from CNN.
Yeah, but the administration has been very weird with masks. They were so keen for Trump and Pence to not wear masks last week that when Pence was speaking at a function, that strange lady on the right there told attendees to take their masks off so Pence didn't stand out. Yep, and she told those guys on the left that as well. And this is a little unfortunate because at least one study has found wearing masks might be the most important thing that a country can do to beat the virus. They found that if 80% of a population wears masks, infection rates drop to about 1/12 of the base number. Either way, the White House is certainly taking the virus seriously now. Economic advisor Kevin Hassett was very honest.
It is scary to go to work. I'd be a lot safer if I was sitting at home than I would be going to the West Wing.
So he's pretty nervous in a place where everyone is being tested at least weekly and sometimes daily. And at the same time, they are trying to get everyone else back to work with none of that testing. Well, good luck with that. Even in the states that locked down early, small business hours dropped 50% before the day of closure. And in states that locked down late, small business hours dropped about the same amount, except for 2 weeks earlier before the day of closure. And in the states with no lockdown at all, small business hours dropped by almost the same amount. It was the people closing the states down, not the government. And I think it'll be the people who will decide when the states reopen. Another reason the administration might be struggling at the moment, Brookings identified 12 key pandemic-related White House positions, and they noted that the Trump administration had 32 people serving in those 12 positions in the first 3 years, compared to 19 people under the first 3 years of Obama and 16 people under the first 3 years of Bush. That's not much continuity, experience, or institutional knowledge, hence mistakes. And on that note, the latest instance of staff turnover is newly minted whistleblower Rick Bright. He's due to testify to Congress in the next week or so, and it promises to be relevant. Bright says that back on January 22, a company called Prestige Ameritech offered to make an additional 1.7 million N95 masks per week, but his bosses refused to take the company up on their offer. And he's got the emails to prove it, including an email from the company presciently warning US mask supplies are imminent risk. I think we're in deep shit. I suspect that when that hearing takes place, we're going to be seeing this clip a few times.
What did you do when you became president to restock those cupboards that you say were bare?
Well, I'll be honest, I have a lot of things going on.
Now, Trump did go on to blame the Mueller inquiry and the impeachment for distracting him, but attack ads don't care about that.
Indeed not. Meanwhile, Dr. Anthony Fauci gave evidence before the Senate Health Committee from home earlier today and warned that the pandemic is not under control and that states and cities that open up too quickly without being prepared are risking serious consequences.
My concern is that we will start to see little spikes that might turn into outbreaks.
Now to the shooting of an unarmed black man in the US state of Georgia. It has become the latest case to highlight racial profiling in America at a time when African Americans are suffering disproportionately from the health and economic effects of this pandemic. It's Sunday, 23rd of February this year, just before 1:15 in the afternoon. 25-year-old Ahmaud Arbery is running down Satilla Drive, a suburban street in Brunswick, in southern Georgia. A white pickup truck has been following Arbery. It stops in front of him. He tries to run around it. There are two men inside. They're armed. 64-year-old Greg McMichael has a .35 Magnum pistol and his 34-year-old son Travis has a shotgun. They tell Arbery to stop. Travis gets out of the truck, scuffles with Arbery, shots are fired and Arbery falls down to the street, suffering fatal gunshot wounds. The McMichaels claim they were trying to make a citizen's arrest. They say Ahmaud Arbery looked like somebody who'd been breaking into local houses. They say he looks like somebody they'd seen with a pistol. Greg McMichael is a former police officer who recently retired as an investigator with the District Attorney's Office. That connection to local authorities may explain why the pair weren't arrested until last week, when video of the shooting was released.
It's absolutely horrific, and Georgians deserve answers.
The McMichaels have been charged with murder and aggravated assault. Over the weekend, more video came to light showing a man resembling Arbery going inside a nearby house under construction. Someone outside the house calls local police.
There's a guy in the house right now. The house under construction.
And you said someone's breaking into it right now?
No, it's all open. It's under construction. And he's running right now. There he goes right now.
Supporters say Ahmaud Arbery was the innocent victim of a modern-day lynching, guilty only of jogging while black. Defenders of the McMichaels claim he was no angel. He'd been in trouble with the police before. Was he a burglar? Well, he didn't break in. The house was open and nothing was taken. Arbery's family say he planned to be an electrician. He was probably just having a look at the building work. Meanwhile, police say there have been no burglaries. The only recent theft in the area was a pistol reportedly stolen from an unlocked car in front of the McMichaels house. Georgia's Attorney General has now ordered an investigation into the local police handling of the case.
And the McMichaels have some problems, John. Firstly, fact problems. Their statement says that they pulled up beside Arbery and shouted for him to stop. That is clearly not true. They parked ahead of him on the video and they tried to block his escape. Also, they say the shooting occurred only after Arbery attacked Travis McMichael and that McMichael was defending himself. But once again, the video shows quite the opposite. That Arbery was defending himself from these weird bearded dudes with guns. Secondly, they've got law problems, because under Georgia law, a citizen's arrest can only be carried out if a crime is committed in their presence or within their immediate knowledge. In this case, there might not have been a crime committed at all, and if there was, it was not in the McMichaels' physical presence, nor in their immediate knowledge. Now, some have said that Arbery was no angel. Frankly, it doesn't matter. He could be a serial killer, but it still wasn't a legitimate citizen's arrest. Also, you can't legally use a citizen's arrest to question a suspect, which is what they say they were trying to do. In fact, trying to question him is evidence that you aren't certain of what he did, which proves it wasn't a legit citizen's arrest. Also, quote, having immediate knowledge of a crime means while it is being committed, not that it maybe was committed once. So again, that's a problem.
Well, for more, we're joined by Kristen Clark. She's the president of the National Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. Kristen Clark, welcome to Planet America.
Thank you for having me.
So is this an open shut case of murder, or is there a defence for the McMichaels?
No doubt the video that surfaced in this matter that showed the tragic killing and the end of Mr. Arbery's life raises grave questions. This is not a man who was armed. This is not a man who was provoking or who wanted an attack. This is a man who was being chased by two white men in a pickup truck, both of them armed. And he should be alive today. My hope is for this family and for the community that they see justice.
I know it took a video to get some action happening, but are you at least heartened that just for once, everyone, Liberals, Conservatives, talkback hosts, gun activists, everyone is on the same page with this video?
You know, it is heartening. This is one moment where politics is not tainting how people are looking at this. We've now seen even President Trump condemn the killing, or at least speak to the fact that this is most unfortunate. You know, it's 2020, and the way in which this killing was carried out really harkens back to some of the darkest days in our nation's history. It harkens back to the Jim Crow era, when we saw African Americans lynched and white mobs who would commit those crimes with impunity. In 2020, we shouldn't be seeing crimes like this today. A man gunned down in broad daylight, unarmed, young, with his whole life ahead of him. So I am indeed heartened by the broad, overwhelming support that we are seeing from the public, a real strong desire and consensus that justice should be served.
And are there any major legal reforms that you think could help to prevent this kind of a killing happening again?
Well, Georgia is one of only 4 states in the country that does not have hate crimes laws, and we can't ignore that fact. There are aspects of this case that are grim and appear to really raise questions about whether this was a racially motivated killing. And so that needs to be a part of the discussion and a part of how we handle this case as it moves through the justice system. But these stand your ground laws and laws that give people the ability to carry out so-called public citizens arrests are deeply troubling. We lived through this with the Trayvon Martin case, where George Zimmerman claimed that he was standing his ground and similarly out policing his community. These laws in an environment where we know that racism exists are deeply problematic.
It doesn't appear to even be close to a citizen's arrest as it's written in the book. But do you think that even as it's written in the book, that law is a problem?
You know, as you note, it is not even close. There is no way that the McMichaels could have seen video footage from inside a house that they did not own. There's no way that they could have claimed that they saw Mr. Arbery carrying out a crime or offense. There was no reason or basis for them to trail him and follow him in their pickup truck. There was no need for them to do so armed. There was no need for them to stop him. There was no need for them to use deadly force. It is all incredibly problematic. It is a reminder about the violence that we live with in the United States, made only more complicated because that violence is often carried out in a context where we see systemic racism.
This case was obscured for a time because of the coronavirus pandemic, but how do you think this case is playing into those other fears for African Americans about their health, their economic security, as well as the safety of particularly the young people out on the streets?
You know, the pandemic is ripping through Black communities all across our country. It's had a devastatingly harsher impact on Black communities. When you look at tests, hospitalizations, and deaths, African Americans are overrepresented. But at the same time, our streets are quiet. There are many people who are at home and complying with stay-at-home orders, leaving many African Americans who are also overrepresented amongst our frontline workers, many who are going to jobs at factories and at grocery stores and places that haven't slowed down, leaving them a bit more vulnerable. So it is a particularly fraught and fragile moment for many African American communities that truly lie at the epicenter of the COVID pandemic.
Kristen Clark, thanks for joining us on Planet America.
Thank you for having me.
Democratic presidential candidates. Where are they now? Andrew Yang. Amy Klobuchar.
I got on the web. I found a really big Scrabble board.
Elizabeth Warren.
Sometimes you do a little tug of war. You wanted to do it this morning. No, not now.
Marianne Williamson.
So let's talk some metaphysics.
Kamala Harris.
I just want to show everybody how to make a tuna salad sandwich. Okay, tuna in a can.
John Hickenlooper.
Well, there's something here in Colorado that folks are jealous of.
Well, it's not your singing. That was Where Are They Now? I'm sorry I asked.
April's unemployment figures weren't just bad news. They were like a bad news onion, layer upon layer of bad news, and with every single layer, you're eating onion.
Very good.
Nah, it's not very good. 20.5 million jobs were lost in April, and this is what that looks like. That's the number of jobs lost for the entire GFC, and this is the number of jobs lost just in April. More than twice as many. Or to put that in monthly totals, these are the job gains and losses for the last 40 years, and April sticks out a tad. In terms of percentages, we've got a post-war record of 14.7% unemployment, beating out 1982's 10.9% and the GFC's 10%, although apparently the Great Depression saw 25% unemployment. Anyway, if we break April's numbers down, that's 14.2% unemployment for white people, 16.7% for black people, and 18.9% for Hispanics. But the deeper you look, the worse it gets. So let's enter the onion. Firstly, the April unemployment figures are way out of date because they're based on a survey taken from April 12 to April 18. And since then, we've seen initial unemployment claims of 4.4 million, 3.8 million, and 3.2 million. So that is 11.5 million more unemployed people already since the April numbers were calculated, which is why economist Ernie Tedeschi projects the real-time unemployment rate this week would be about 20%. But let's ignore that for now. Let's go back to those April 12 numbers again. The number even back then could have been way higher, because there are about 7.5 million extra workers who are classified as employed but absent. And if those workers had been classified as unemployed on temporary layoff instead, the unemployment rate would have been almost 5 percentage points higher. So that would be 19.5%. But wait, that doesn't include the people who are working part-time because they couldn't find full-time work or because their hours were cut. There were 10.9 million of those. So throw them in the mix and you're pushing 25 or 26%. But wait again, that also doesn't count those who, when they lost their jobs, just dropped out of the labour force altogether. This is the percentage of working age people with jobs, and after April, only 51% of them do. That is a lot of people who've dropped out of the labour force. 6 million in April alone. And if you added all those labour force exodus to the unemployment numbers, the unemployment rate would have been 3.5% higher. So, add up all those people who've lost jobs but aren't being counted, or they've been forced to work part-time, or they've basically been screwed by the recession, and you're approaching 30% of the labour force, and that's in the middle of April. So are there any silver linings here? Yes! Unlike during the GFC, when most of the job losses were permanent, this recession has seen the overwhelming majority of job losses being temporary. That's 18 million temporary job losses to 2 million permanent ones. And as Goldman Sachs notes, the 3 post-war recessions with the highest share of temporary layoffs were followed by the fastest labour market recoveries. But even if every one of those temporary job losses were back at work tomorrow, the unemployment rate would still be 9%. So maybe we're just going to have to get used to the taste of onion.
Very good.
Now, it may or may not be reassuring to know that there are some remarkable similarities between the global influenza outbreak of 1918-19, the so-called Spanish flu, and today's coronavirus pandemic. Both were viruses that jumped from animals to humans and attacked the respiratory system. A key difference, though, the Spanish flu was most deadly amongst young to middle-aged people. It turned their stronger immune systems against them. Both viruses were spread far and wide by travellers. The 1918 Spanish flu may have actually started at an army base in Kansas, but later that year it went through ships packed with soldiers and sailors returning from the Great War in Europe like a wildfire. 40% of American military personnel caught the deadly flu strain between September and November 1918. In 1918, the British Prime Minister David Lloyd George caught the flu but survived, just as Boris Johnson did this year. US President Woodrow Wilson also contracted the flu in 1919. So far, Donald Trump has escaped the coronavirus, but several White House staff haven't been so lucky. Like today, in 1918, there was no widely available or effective vaccine, and the basic health advice was pretty much the same.
If you get it, stay home, rest in bed, keep warm, drink hot drinks, and stay quiet until the symptoms are past. Then continue to be careful, for the greatest danger is from pneumonia or some kindred disease after the influenza is gone.
One thing 1918 had all over 2020 was catchy rhymes designed to stick in people's heads and change their behaviour.
Cover up each cough and sneeze. If you don't, you'll spread disease.
And when wearing face masks was made mandatory in places like San Francisco,
obey the laws and wear the gauze. Protect your jaws from septic paws.
Septic paws? Ugh. Another thing that we have in common with 1918 is government secrecy and crackpot conspiracy theories. Just as China is now accused of downplaying the seriousness of COVID-19, leaving other nations unprepared, in 1918 governments around the world suppressed the mounting death toll in the final months of the First World War to protect morale. It's a lot harder to cover up a pandemic these days, but it's not for lack of trying. In 1918, some people believed the technological wonder of the age, radio waves, were responsible for the pandemic. Now, some people are blaming 5G. There is no evidence to support either theory, but just to be safe, I won't be listening to Chaz's podcast.
Hey!
Then, as now, businesses and public venues in major cities like Chicago closed, including cinemas. Poor old 1918 didn't have streaming services in their homes, but then they didn't have the Tiger King either. In 1918, plenty of quack cures were around though, like rubbing onions on your chest. And some doctors even promoted potentially deadly strychnine and quinine as cures. They even suggested iodine as an internal disinfectant. Of course, nobody would be that silly today.
Disinfectant on the inside.
But when President Trump says,
we're not going to let the cure be worse than the problem,
he's kind of got a point. Doctors in late 1918 prescribed dangerous doses of aspirin, more than 10 times what are regarded now as safe levels. Some studies suggest that thousands of flu deaths were hastened or even caused by aspirin poisoning.
View this the same as the flu.
Some US city officials in 1918 also made the mistake of confusing the pandemic Spanish influenza with seasonal flu, and cities like Philadelphia suffered terrible losses as a result. But the most useful lesson from 1918 probably comes from the way the flu seemed to be declining before coming roaring back in another deadly wave in cities where restrictions were relaxed. In November 1918, Chicago's health commissioner said the worst was over and the shutdown could end.
In a few days, I am sure I shall again be justified in stating that Chicago is the healthiest city in the world.
New infections and deaths spiked. Things were even worse in St. Louis, where they got complacent after imposing social distancing measures early and flattening the curve. Authorities lifted restrictions on public gatherings 2 months after the outbreak began, and the flu came back with a vengeance. By the middle of 1919, out of a population of a little over 100 million Americans, 30% had been infected and 675,000 people had died. It's still a little bit of a mystery why the Spanish flu pandemic petered out after about a year and a half. Maybe it was hygiene and prevention, or maybe the virus mutated to a less lethal strain. So it could be, as the president now keeps saying,
it's going to disappear. One day it's like a miracle, it will disappear.
But hopefully without the massive human toll of the Spanish flu.
Just about every day brings a news story about the incompetence and corruption that seems to follow in the wake of America's most powerful son-in-law, Jared Kushner. Most recently, Jared Kushner led a hastily thrown-together task force, largely made up of young volunteers, who were charged with procuring much-needed personal protective equipment to help fight the virus. It did not go well. The boy wonder has been tasked with streamlining an effort to get a coronavirus vaccine by the end of the year, which the White House is calling Operation Warp Speed. This is the latest in a long series of tasks the president has given to his son-in-law, despite an utter lack of qualifications for said tasks.
It's my house.
In a preview of the election to come, President Trump's campaign released a new ad this week blaming China for the pandemic and then trying to link them to his rival Joe Biden.
Coronavirus infected millions, crushed the world economy. One nation deserves the blame, China. They lied about it, covered it up. Joe Biden coddles China. He criticized President Trump's travel ban, accused him of
hysterical xenophobia.
Joe Biden won't stand up to China. He never has, he never will.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
We'll wait and see whether Trump can pin all of this on China or pin Biden to China. But right now, it's the allegations of former staffer Tara Reid that are taking a bit of a chunk out of Joe Biden's popularity. Biden has denied the claims, but his unfavourability number has ticked up 3 points to 48% in this week's Morning Consult poll. His favourability is down 2 points, losing ground amongst female voters, white suburban voters and black voters, all crucial demographics. The same poll gave President Trump a 44% favourability rating, but 53% view the president unfavourably. Head-to-head, Biden is leading, but just by 3 points nationally. That's the danger zone for him. And the best news for Biden remains, among the voters that don't like either of them, he gets 46%, while Trump only gets 14% of them, Chaz.
Yeah, the so-called double haters, they're going to be important, I feel. In other good news for Biden, he appears to have successfully hacked the Matrix.
Introduce me. Am I on? Hey, good evening, Tampa. Thanks so much for tuning in.
Although I think the glasses make him the bad guy. In real good news for Biden, number cruncher Harry Enton has noticed that Biden has the steadiest polling advantage in a race against an incumbent since at least 1944, with 95% of all polls within 6 points of the average. We've marvelled at how Trump's numbers have been set in concrete for 3 years now, and now even a pandemic and sexual assault allegations against his opponent can't shift them substantially. Although some numbers that are shifting very slowly are Trump's handling of the corona crisis. Over the last 6 weeks, his corona approval has slowly dropped 6 points, and his disapproval has crawled up 5 points. Any Trump recovery probably needs to start there.
Interesting. And that is it for another trip to Planet America. We will see you at the same time next Wednesday night on ABC TV, iView and online.
And you can see the Fireside Chat on the ABC News channel on Friday at 8:15 p.m. See you there.
Good night.